All right. Well, we will give everyone a few more minutes here. We'll probably get started about, maybe two or so after the hour, two or three after the hour. There's usually quite a few people that come in a little bit late. While we are while we're waiting, if you want to drop in the chat where you're calling in from, that's always kind of fun. And yeah, we'll get started here in just a minute. We have some people coming in from all over the place: Taiwan, Norway, Canada, Dallas, Michigan. Hey, Josh, good to see you here. See some other people I recognized. Switzerland. All right. Yeah, unfortunately, Luma by default, when I set this up, doesn't mute people when they join. And so if I don't go in and remember to set that setting before the workshop starts, it unfortunately people might be unmuted when they join. So I will fix that in future meetings. Unfortunately, I can't fix that in this one. But glad that everyone is here. We will go ahead and get started. There'll probably be a lot more people that join in. But before we do get started, if I would encourage you all to, I'm just going to send a link here in the chat. If you have not already, please go to our GitHub and give us a star. That really helps people find us. If you do give it a star today, or if you've already done it in the past, just say that you did, and we will pick some people and we'll send them our book on building AI agents. So Principles of Building AI Agents, written by Sam, our co-founder. So I know we'll have some other people here from the Mastra team that will be answering questions along the way. So I think I saw Tyler's here. I'm sure Abby and Sam might also be dropping in. So if you have questions as we go through this, please drop them in the chat. We'll get to them, a lot of them, as we go. If not, we'll spend some time at the end. Today, let me share my screen. But today we wanted to talk a little bit about how you can use MCP with Mastra agents and really give your agents various tools. And so I wanted to build a personal assistant example, something that was pretty relatable, pretty simple, but everyone here could leave by cloning the repo and playing around with it, adding some more MCP servers, and hopefully doing some pretty interesting things. So I will share my screen and we will get started. All right. So as I mentioned, the goal is to build a personal assistant agent with MCP and Mastra. We're going to talk a little bit about what MCP is and why does it matter. If you came to our past MCP workshops, some of this stuff is going to be stuff we covered. So I'm going to go through it pretty quick because some of you probably seen it before, but we'll keep it kind of short. We'll also talk about how do you actually find MCP servers, how you can use MCP with Mastra to actually build this personal assistant agent, and then some Q&A. So who am I? I'm one of the founders and the CPO of Mastra. I was at Gatsby and Netlify. I built a product called AudioFeed, and I've been doing open source stuff for a long time. I spent a lot of time in the Drupal community, starting 15 years ago. Not to date myself or anything, but please reach out, connect with me on X or Twitter, whatever you call it these days, and LinkedIn. So a lot of you here probably are somewhat familiar with MCP, but just to kind of give the high level, what is MCP? It's an open standard that connects LLMs. It's kind of like the USB-C port for AI applications. Whether it's like local tools that you can add in or tools with third-party applications, it really is a good way to just connect various systems together. And it's especially helpful when you're connecting, whether it's AI agents to these systems or tools like Claude Desktop or Cursor or Windsurf. And why did it exist? Well, it's always been this like integration problem when you're integrating different systems where you end up writing a lot of this glue code. And so MCP was kind of the protocol that the goal being, Anthropic's goal was maybe we can eliminate a lot of this glue code and make it a lot easier for these systems to be able to be connected in a much more standardized way. So how does it work? Well, it uses a pretty simple client server architecture. There's MCP client, there's the protocol in between, and then there's the MCP server that connects to potentially different services. You can see in this example, there's GitHub, Slack, there's also like a local file system. And some real world applications. There's a lot of people using MCP within internal systems, so they can make it easier for people internally to connect to different services in a more standardized way. There are a lot of dev platforms that have MCP. We're going to see some examples of a lot of the various registries and all the different options that we have to choose from. And then you have all these different connectors like Google Drive, Slack, GitHub. And so when you think about what are some of the benefits, just that really unified integration, faster development because you don't have to write that glue code, and then your separation of concerns. So MCP is kind of a clean split between the AI application you're building and the data and tool integrations. So there are a whole bunch of registry options, and there's actually more that are not included in this list. So we will talk about that. But it's kind of like, if you're familiar with the JavaScript world, which is where I've spent a lot of time, it's kind of like NPM. It's a package manager for MCP servers. So there are tools like Zapier, Composio, Smithery, MCP Run, Gumloop. There's an official one, a more official one now by Anthropic. We'll show and talk about, but there's a whole bunch of them. And each of them have different quality of integrations, different number, different types of integrations. And so you should definitely look through a few of them, but we have many options when choosing from MCP servers. And there are of various quality, right? There's not a guarantee on the quality level of any of these things. So a lot of them will provide ways to see like how many times it's downloaded or some kind of metrics on these different registries, so you can kind of validate which ones are the most popular, which is usually a signal of quality, but not always. So you should always make sure you're kind of doing your due diligence there. There are so many registries popping up, not only just MCP servers, but MCP registries that list MCP servers. We just actually released today the MCP registry, which is just a list of all the registries. And so I'll show that off here in a second once we get through the slides, but you can actually see all the different registries we're aware of, and you can kind of click through those. So what is Mastra? We're an open source AI agent framework for TypeScript. It comes with tools, or agents with tools, memory, tracing. We have state machine-based workflows that provide human in the loop, and simple API that allows you to do dot step, dot then, dot after. So it's really easy to kind of build out complex workflows. We have evals baked into the framework. We have storage for RAG pipelines. We have a local development playground. Really just makes it really easy to get started building AI agents with TypeScript. Our goal is to be very opinionated, but flexible. So we want you to be able to get further faster, meaning that you don't have to think about a lot of the just default decisions. You can get started really quickly, but it's flexible enough that you can swap out things whether that's different storage backends, different database providers, different tool providers, all these different things to make it really easy and flexible, so you don't ever feel like you're actually locked in. And what we're going to be doing is we're going to go through a simple Mastra agent. We're going to give this Mastra agent access to our email, calendar, let it post for us on social media. I'll show how you can set up a Telegram bot that allows us to communicate with our agent from anywhere. And we'll walk through this whole process, and maybe we'll have some time to show off a workflow or maybe some other MCP servers. This is actually one of the workshops that, most of the time we're going all the way up to the hour and sometimes even past. This was actually candidly, this was so easy. I don't even know if it's going to take the entire hour, which is kind of nice because it's actually pretty simple once you see how this works, where you can hopefully use your imagination and think about all the different things you could kind of wire this thing up to do. And I just picked a couple things that were interesting to me that I would use, but you can obviously think of your own use cases and how you might be able to wire it up. And it's actually very easy to do. So we might not even take the whole time today. So let's go ahead and why don't we show off just the very simple example. Before we do, let me show, we do have this Master.ai MCP-registry. You can see there's a list of MCP registries we have. Here's the one from Anthropic, or the official one that Anthropic created with a list of servers. There's a whole bunch more. Cursor has one, Gumloop has one, Composio has one, which we'll use today. MCP Run is another good one. Smithery is another good one. I mean, we'll also use Zapier's today as well. But in theory, we could use any of these things. That's the nice thing about what we're doing with our agent that we're building, is that you could kind of go through here, look through the different options, and you should be able to use any of these MCP servers alongside your Mastra agents. So that's one of the nice things about the protocol. Okay. So the first thing we might want to do is let's actually just run this simple example. I have a very simple Mastra project. I just ran, if you were to start from the Mastra website and run npm create Mastra at latest, you would get an agent similar to this. So we'll walk through some of this code, and I'll show you really simply how it works, and we will kind of go forward from there. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to run it so you can see what it does right now. I think looks like it's already running. All right. So with Mastra, you get this local development playground, and you can see there's an agent here. I can actually chat with it. It has access to one tool right now, Get Weather. So I can say, what is the weather in San Francisco, which is where I'm currently at. And so you can see it runs this weather tool, which returns the weather. We'll show the code of how that works, but it works. I also did add, and I'll show the code for this too, a way to interact with this agent while it's running through a Telegram bot. So the nice thing about this is I can actually now use it on my mobile device.
Truc avec le site téléphone pour.
So I can use this on my mobile device and actually then see and interact with this agent from anywhere, assuming that my, of course, dev server was running. But I could leave my computer running, go, out in the world and continue chatting with my agent. So let's just test it out. What is the weather in Austin? So you can see it's running the weather tool, and it now returns, and it gives me the weather in Austin. So it's pretty cool. And we'll do a lot of stuff with this, just showing how the Telegram bot works the same way, whether I'm using it in the playground or I'm communicating with it from Telegram. But let's start by actually looking at the code that makes this work. And then let's start adding tools using MCP to give this agent even more capabilities. So that's really what we want to do. We want to allow it to do even more. And I'm going to make this just a little bit bigger. So in Mastra, when you get started, we have a couple folders that we'll kind of talk through. So it creates a source Mastra directory. There's an agents folder, which is what we're in now. And we have one agent, which is our personal assistant. It comes with often will come with the tools folder, which is where we're defining our weather tool. And then there's a workflows folder, which you can define more deterministic agentic workflows. Really, the only thing that this thing does right now is it's a very simple agent with a system prompt. The model is using OpenAI, so I did have to drop in, OpenAI API key, and it's using this weather tool. So if I were to look at that weather tool, it has an input schema, which is location, the output schema, which you could see, if I go back to even Telegram, it's giving me this output schema, and it just runs this one function, which makes an API call to essentially geocode the location and then get the forecast for that geocoded location. And then it returns it. So a very simple function is all that this does. But we want to actually now extend our agent's capabilities. So one of the first things you'll notice in the playground is that it says the agent will not remember previous messages. So we need to enable memory to actually do that. So we're going to go ahead and just add very simple memory. I'll just import it first. Now add memory. And now if I were to save this and come back, you're going to see I have the sidebar over here with any memories that I have as I go through this. So what is the weather in Sioux Falls, which is where I'm originally from? Use the weather tool. It'll now show this in my chat history. So we got memory. That was pretty easy to add. I did have to install the @mastra/memory package, which I already did before this, but that was pretty easy. We can get a little more complex with memory. So I'm actually going to copy in an example from some example code, and we'll talk through how we can get a little bit more complex with the way we're setting up memory. So this is a more complicated example of memory, but I'm using master memory. I'm setting some options. I'm saying that I want to keep the last 20 messages in context. So it'll automatically add that to the context window. I want to also use a semantic recall to find as the top K, which is 3 related messages based on my prompt. So what it'll do is it'll take the prompt, it'll then basically create an embedding and do a vector search and find 3 other messages that might be relevant. And then before each of those 3 messages, it'll give me 2 previous messages and 1 after message. So it's kind of giving me like 3 message chunks with a few different messages in there. And what this allows you to do is configure, if I were to have a long running conversation, I keep the last 20 messages in my kind of short-term working memory, but then I also can go back in time and find more relevant messages from the past. We can also set up a working memory template. So if I were to start giving my agent information about my name, my preferences, my interests, it will then use this template to keep track of that information and allow it to then answer questions. So it should remember my name, and it should remember if I had any preferences or interests, and then it'll use that information in the LLM calls that it's making. So this is a slightly more sophisticated example of memory. We can go ahead and let's just see if that works. And it's not really going to work that well because it's going to be in the message history, but it would use this template and store this as an additional. As you can see, it did use this tool, update working memory. It's only because I told it something that should be important, right? It thinks of this as an important piece of information. So you can see it updates this template, which always gets passed into the actual context window. So now if I were to have a really long conversation, doesn't matter how far I go, I would be able to always know, it would always know that my name is Shane, and any other important information I want to kind of put into that template. Okay, but now let's actually start looking and doing some stuff with MCP. So I did install in my package.json, I did install Mastra/MCP, and I'm going to just grab an example here, and we will start adding some information to our, or adding some capabilities to our agent. All right, we're going to need to import this. All right, so we're going to talk about what this does and how this was all set up. But you can see here, I'm using MCP configuration. You could, of course, read the docs on how this works, but we define servers. In this case, I'm going to use Zapier's MCP. And what that's going to allow me to do is it's going to allow me to connect different tools to MCP. And just give me 1 second here. I'm going to stop sharing just for a second. There we go. All right. And so if we go to, we actually go to the Zapier MCP website. If you are unmuted, can you please mute? That'd be great. Thank you. And if I go here, so in Zapier, if I go, let's see here, no, MCPs. Some of these interfaces are so new that they're kind of hard to interact with. So sometimes you have to kind of figure it out as you go, because I think they're constantly improving it. Zapier's works really well, but the navigation and everything isn't as polished as it probably will be. So one of the things when you're setting up a Zapier MCP, they're going to give you this MCP server endpoint. This is kind of like a password or an API key. So I'm not going to show you what this one is, but I have it in my environment variable. So I basically copied that URL and dropped it into an environment variable. So that's what you'll see in the configuration. But I can also now edit MCP actions. So Zapier is interesting because it doesn't just give you an MCP server for each item. It doesn't give me one for Gmail, one for Typefully, like maybe Composio does. It actually allows me to add new actions. So in this case, I've added some capabilities to label emails, find an email, send an email. I've also allowed it access to my Typefully account, which I had to then, of course, OAuth to both of these things. But it now has access to create drafts for to send on Twitter, for instance. I can add new actions, and I can, look for maybe Google Sheets or calendar. And so I could allow it to find events or do anything like that. But you'll notice now, just going to delete this one. You'll notice now if I were to add this in, I'm using that URL, and I were to save this. If I go back to the playground, once it finishes, let's rerun it. Oh, I know what I did. I forgot to actually add it here. So I need to do that. So I actually have to pass in my tools to my agent. So if I don't give it the tools, it's not actually going to work. So if I go back here, refresh, you can see now I have a bunch more tools. So I can find email, I can create a draft. Now, typically what you'd want to do is you'd want to really improve this system prompt. let's just try it without, because if the tool descriptions are good enough, it might actually still work. It probably will, because it's right now it's pretty simple. As you add more tools though, you have to be very explicit in your system prompt. Your system prompt is going to get very long of when you should use certain tools and what circumstances, or otherwise what you're going to realize is as you add more tools, it's going to be less reliable in actually calling those tools. It might not always make the right decisions. It's kind of like, as a human, if I give you, 3 tools and say, pick between the 3, you're probably going to make the right answer. But if I give you, 500 tools, it's going to be harder for you to decide which one you should use in what situation. But let's go ahead and just see. And I've already, since I've connected OAuth through Zapier, I should already have access to all this stuff. So just out of curiosity, let's just try it here in Telegram. And let's say, send an email to Shane@Mastra.ai with a subject, hello from workshop, and a body that says, this worked. What could go wrong, right? I connect this to one of my other Gmail accounts, so it'll come from one of my other accounts to my master email. So you can see it's sending an email. There's the subject. There's the body of the email. Is errors false? Okay, let's see. I'm not going to pull up my email, but I will just kind of, if you're watching on my video, you should be able to see, I did get an email. Hello from the workshop. So it did work. Let's also now try to, can you create a draft in Typefully or a tweet that says, so it's going to use Typefully, create a draft, and it says there's a draft tweet. Let's actually go to Typefully. You can see this. My master agent created this tweet. So of course, I could have it draft tweets for me. I could give it tools to actually send the tweet too if I wanted it to do that, but didn't quite want to do that yet. But you can see it was very easy to add that, right? I didn't have to do anything other than click a few buttons, OAuth a few times, and drop in maybe 6 lines of code to give this this capability to my agent. So that's pretty cool. Let's keep going and let's add some more. So another good option for MCP, Composio has a bunch, and you can see here they have Google Sheets and Notion, GitHub, and a whole bunch more. And theirs works very similar. So in this case, if I go to GitHub, it kind of gives you some validation based on the active users and total people that have used it. But you're going to generate a unique URL for each MCP. In this case, I'd have to have one for GitHub, one for Notion, and then it would give me this URL that I could then use. So in this case, I'm just going to grab this from here, but I have another server here, which I just call it GitHub. I give it the URL, which is, again, I just set the environment variable from what I grabbed from that, from the Composio website. And now I should just be able to save. And I don't think I should have to do anything, and it should just work. So if I refresh, now you can see I got a whole bunch of GitHub connections here. Now, the way that Composio works, and I've already done this, so I won't have to do it again. But the first time I use the tool, if I haven't authenticated, it'll give me a link in the chat to do the OAuth, basically the OAuth handshake. So I could basically say connect to GitHub. It'll give me a link. I click on it. I allow access, and now this MCP can actually access my GitHub. All right, so I'm just going to ask it for the last 5 PRs from the Mastra repo. Let's see what the team is trying to ship. All right. So it looks like Nick is shipping some things today. That's cool. Like Kenny's shipping some things. Or the MCP registry link must be out on the footer. That's good. We just created that today. Ward's shipping some things, Darrow's shipping some things, and I'm not surprised to see Abby shipping some things too. So we have a whole bunch of PRs, and if I were to look at the Mastra GitHub, which feel free to go look at the Mastra GitHub and confirm, and while you're there, give it a star. You can see it matches up with those 5 PRs. So I could ask it to summarize those. I could do all kind of interesting things like summarize the last 10 PRs that were merged and give me a sense of what we shipped, or give me the last 15 commits and give me a summary of those. You can ask all kinds of questions. So, and again, I could do this from the the dev playground, or I could have done it from Telegram because it's the same. It's talking through to the same agent. All right, let's give it some more capabilities. That was easy. GitHub was easy. Let's do a few more. Let's give it access to Hacker News. I like to see what's going on in the world of tech, and sometimes read some angry comments from people. So that's Hacker News for you. Let's go ahead and check that out. So this one I think I found on maybe Smithery or one of the other MCP that basically it's running this through like an npx package. So you can see it's not just always a URL. Sometimes it's a command. In this case, what this runs is npx locally with these arguments. So npx-y and then this specific package, which is just a community contributed Hacker News MCP server. So if I save this and I go back and refresh again, I got Hacker News. All right. What are the top 5 posts on Hacker News? All right. Why tap a wheel of cheese? Usability improvements, Hacker News, owning my own data, and ELD. All right. So there's it tells you the number of points, the author, how many comments. I could even click on it and it brings me to the link from Hacker News. So it's pretty cool. I'm now able to kind of see, and I could do some really cool things like look at all the posts, the top posts, and based on these preferences, only show me ones that are AI, JavaScript, TypeScript, or maybe science, since I like to read some of that stuff. But I could kind of have it do a first pass filter and only like surface the ones that it knows are going to be interesting to me. And then it would be able to, using working memory, it'll be able to track those interests, right? Those things that I'm interested in. And it would then know that if I ask for the top posts of Hacker News, that I should probably, I could sort by the, based on interests. So it's a pretty easy way to add capabilities to just, search or sites that have, that you might want to get information from. Okay, so we're going to continue to go and do one more thing. So we also can give it some local tools. So I mentioned that that's another thing you can do with MCP. So I'm going to give it a text editor tool. You need to basically give it a path. I need to make sure that this notes directory is created. And it is. So let's go ahead and try this. I'm just going to shut this down because I think this one might need to restart. Let's make sure that it actually runs. Okay, so it did run here. And now I'm just going to create a completely new chat and say, can you create a reminder to call my mom today? Why not? I haven't talked to her for the last day or two. I should probably give her a call. Okay, it doesn't say, it's not seeing. Maybe I need to refresh. There it is. Now let's try it. Okay, so this is one of those things where if you don't prompt it the correct way, it doesn't. And honestly, one of these problems is probably the system prompt. So we're starting to run into the limits of a very narrowly defined system prompt. I kind of mentioned that as you add more tools, things are, will likely start to go off the rails. So why don't we actually improve the system prompt and let's see if it will then, be able to do that correctly. So I do have just an example of what I used in the past for the system prompt, and we'll go through it. It's not, I didn't spend that much time on it, to be honest. If I were actually going to ship this to, real users, this would probably have to be 2 or 3 times as long, I would guess, just roughly. So it's saying your helpful assistant. You can help with emails, monitor GitHub activities, scheduling social media posts, providing weather information. You have access to the following tools. So here I'm saying you have access to the file system. You can use this to store information, information such as reminders for later use. Okay, so let's try this and let's see if we get a little bit better result. So make sure this is running. Looks like it is. Let's refresh and let's just try this again. All right, so you see, I wasn't planning for that to happen, but it's, as I mentioned before, it kind of came back, right? I said, you're probably going to run into a situation where a simple system prompt isn't going to work. I updated the system prompt. I asked the same thing, and now it created a reminder. Let's see if it actually can read this. So I had some from before when I was testing. So, I call mom, book a flight back to San Francisco, call dad. I already called. Okay. So then you can see I can basically interact with it, keep track of to-dos, it can keep track of priorities, keep track of, grocery list, whatever I wanted it to do. But it can read and write files, basically store, more permanent types of memories that I wanted to store as actually in a file. All right. So we did quite a bit already. We gave it a whole bunch of capabilities. Let's actually walk through the code of how the Telegram bot works, because that is, kind of interesting. It's not that complicated. You could basically copy it and you'd have a Telegram bot pretty quickly. And all this, of course, is going to be, it's all already up on our GitHub, but I'll send out the link after this workshop. So let's go and look at how this Telegram bot is set up. And I'm going to be honest, I did not write this code. So I'm pretty sure Claude wrote this code, but it was curated by Tyler. So maybe, under Tyler's supervision, Claude wrote some of this code and Tyler maybe fixed it. So thanks, Tyler, for this, because it just worked. But we can walk through how it works a little bit so you can see that it's not doing anything that, that extensive. It's using Node Telegram bot API. Talks, it has like max message length, message response or message result length. It creates a new bot instance and it creates a handler to basically handle incoming messages. So let's just look at that handler, because that's basically the most important part of this. The rest of it is just splitting messages, making sure messages don't get too long. And there's a lot more you could do. Even if you looked at the output, I might want to actually clean that up. But if it's just a bot for me, I like to see all that extra information so I know it's doing the things I want it to do. But if you didn't, you could, of course, clean a lot of this stuff up. So let's look at what it's actually doing. So right now it's only set up to handle text. So if it's not text, it's gonna basically give you an error. When we get the initial message, we respond with thinking. That's why when you see I send it a message, what's the what's the weather in Chicago? You can see it says thinking, right? That's just coming from that while it's actually doing its thing. It starts with that message and then it will, replace it with whatever comes in. So starts there, updates every essentially half a second, and then it calls in our personal assistant agent.stream. So we're pulling in our personal assistant agent that we created, and we're just calling .stream on it. And it gives it a thread ID, a resource ID, gives it a little bit of context, and then it starts to process the stream. And this is basically you're reading the chunks of the stream, and if it's text, it's just going to add the text. If it's a tool call, it does that formatting where you see the little tool icon, it says it's using the tool, and it will then give you the information about calling the tool with what the input was. When you get a result, it'll tell you the output, if there was an error, if there's any like reasoning steps. And it basically just goes through that whole update loop, right? So you can kind of see that playing out here. Here's the input to the tool, then here's the actual tool result output. So overall, that was pretty easy. In order to wire it up, I just went into my source Mastra index file, and I'm just running it, which basically means when the server starts, it starts this Telegram integration. And so it's always running. My Playground's running, my Telegram bot is running. In order to create the Telegram bot, you did have to, in Telegram, go to what they call a bot father and request a new bot, and they give you this Telegram bot token. It's actually very easy. It was basically one message to this other Telegram bot, which allows you to get a token to create your own bot. And then you can configure it, give it a icon, give it a name, all that kind of stuff. But it's very simple to do. We didn't talk about what this Mastra class is, but that's what really powers the Playground, makes all of this work. You basically give it agents, you can give it workflows, you can specify how you want the logging to work, and then it's all basically set up and working. So that's how the Playground knows, for instance, to pull in the agents that it pulls in. All right, the last thing we will do is we will talk through just a simple workflow and how that works, because it's kind of an interesting thing. If I were to continue to build on this, what I would really want to do is I'd want to basically have a workflow that runs maybe at specified points during the day. So you can imagine, I would want this personal assistant, maybe I would just leave this running all the time, but at certain times, traditionally in the morning, maybe Monday through Friday, send me a summary of all the GitHub activity that I care about and maybe summarize it so I know, hey, what's going out in the Mastra repo today. I would also maybe want to have it send me, pull in some top Hacker News articles based on my preferences, so I don't have to actually scan the whole homepage. It can kind of scan it for me, give me the top, 5 or 6 that I want, but not too many, so I don't end up spending too much time. And you can imagine like all these different things that you might want to do, but you'd almost want it to be scheduled, like on a recurring basis. Give me information when you think that I need it. The other thing that I would also wire it up to do, which I'm not going to show today, and maybe I'll push this example eventually, but it would be really nice if it did the first pass through my email. If I get a new email, I want you to basically categorize it for me. For me, I basically categorize things in folders, and I star important emails that I know I need to come back to. So I could probably write a good system prompt and have the LLM decide that for me, and then I wouldn't have to maybe pay as much attention to my email and kind of do the first pass for me as well. I am not going to show you my email inbox because I don't want to be embarrassed at how many unread emails I have. But you can imagine that a bot like this could help someone like me. So let's go ahead and let's take a look at this workflow. Before we do look at the code, let's go into our workflows and let's click view workflows. It says 3 steps. So I kind of mentioned this before. If I had a daily workflow, I would want this to get Hacker News articles, summarize some of the PRs or commit messages maybe that are going out. And then I have a step just kind of combine that into one single message that it sends back. So I haven't actually tested this recently. Let's see if it works. So you can see it's getting the Hacker News articles, and you can see here the stories from Hacker News that match your interests in AI, JavaScript, and TypeScript, and science. Okay, This is going to keep, so this one's running now. It's going to go to, or it's going to go to this second one here. It's going to take a little while longer because I actually have it grabbing quite a few PRs and kind of summarizing. So it's got to go to the GitHub API. You can see summarize Mastra PRs is now completed. Here's the recent pull requests, and then it kind of combines everything and summarizes it. So if I look, it's not showing in the CLI, but it's kind of in a not necessarily the best format to read. I'd probably actually want it to send to my Telegram bot, so I just get a Telegram message in the morning or whenever I ran this. But we can kind of look at this and see if it's directionally right. One of the pull requests focus on enhancing the documentation. Another update involves adding a link to the MCP registry in the documentation footer. Yep, we mentioned that. Memory and storage improvements, voice and real-time separation. So you can see it does kind of does what I ask. I would need to spend some time to actually format this a little bit better, make it a little more readable. But again, I wouldn't actually interact with it through this. I would want it to just send me a Telegram message, which would be pretty easy to wire up. But let's look at how this workflow actually works. When looking at Mastra workflows, I always like to start at the bottom and kind of work my way up. So this workflow first gets Hacker News articles, summarizes Mastra PRs, and combines them. I could actually just run these two in parallel rather than sequentially. That'd actually speed up the whole workflow. But depending on my OpenAI rate limits and all that, you wouldn't want to run too many in parallel. This would probably be fine though. But let's look at these different steps. So workflow is just a collection of steps. This one loads in my personal assistant agent, creates this prompt, which is fetch the top 20 stories from Hacker News. After receiving it, only return stories that fit into my interests. Here are my interests, return a maximum of 5. And then I call agent.generate, which will just run it. Before you notice I called agent.stream when it was actually streaming to Telegram. This one I'm just calling generate, which is don't stream the results, just wait until it's all done and then send it back. So there's multiple ways you can kind of actually talk to agents programmatically. And then I just return that response text. For summarizing Mastra PRs, it's very similar. I'm just calling that agent. I fetch the last 10 PRs, sort by date descending, after retrieving, provide a few paragraph summary of what changes are being made. Same kind of thing, same format, right? Get the last X number of PRs, summarize it, return the response text. And I just have a step that kind of combines that into one message, which then I would probably have a step that sends it to my Telegram bot. So it actually just pings me when this thing's run. But pretty straightforward. So the next steps that I would do is maybe run it on cron, or there's some node scheduling tools that you could set up, which would allow you to basically set a timer of when you want this thing to run, and it would go ahead and trigger this workflow and run everything. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and we'll call that good on walking through examples. Got a few slides, and then we'll open it up for the last 10 minutes to have some questions. I see there's a lot in the chat that I have not been keeping up with, but I imagine hopefully some on the team have been keeping up with a lot of that for me. But so it's just some final things, some links here. There's our GitHub, our website. Join us in Discord, and if you have questions, if you're trying some stuff out and you run into problems, we have a pretty helpful community. So it's a really good place to go if you just have general questions, if you want to talk about building agents, anything like that. You can check out our MCP registry. It's actually, this link is wrong. It should be MCP-registry, but it should be on the footer of our website as if the PR was correct. And follow me on Twitter or X, connect with me on LinkedIn as well. And then, as I mentioned before, please give us a star on GitHub. If you did, drop it in the chat. We will pick some people will try to follow up with you and send you an actual physical copy of the book. If you don't have a physical copy, there's also a link to the book in the footer, and you can get a virtual copy. But we'll try to follow up with a bunch of you and send out some physical copies. And if you do want to try out Mastra Cloud, I didn't show Mastra Cloud today because I just wanted this agent to run locally, but I could deploy this agent to Mastra Cloud and actually have it running so it's more generally available. I don't need to rely on my machine being on all the time. But that's, if you do want access to that, please go and sign up, and we're slowly rolling out access to Mastra Cloud. All right, let's go ahead and I'll stop sharing and we will answer some questions. And I'm going to take a while to catch up on the chat. If anyone on the team is here and if there's any good questions, please just unmute and we can talk them out together.
I feel like I've answered
There were
a
a
lot.
lot. Oh yeah, go ahead.
I feel like I got most of them, but go ahead, Tyler.
I was just gonna say same thing.
Yeah. All right. So if anyone else has other questions. All right. So from what I see from the docs, Mastra provides storage adapters. What if we want to integrate each Mastra model into our existing database? So yes, you can actually, there are adapters for, Postgres and a bunch of other providers already. We are adding more. We're working with some other providers. There'll be some deeper integration with like MongoDB and a number of others that we're starting to work with. So if it doesn't exist today, it probably will. But do let us know if there's one that's not supported, so we can make sure that we add that to the list of things that we're going to make sure we add in the future. Okay, so can you please talk about memory in depth a bit? How would you set up memory so the agent can serve user for years and learn about the user at a better understanding of what the user wants? I'm going to actually, Tyler, if you're here, do you want to answer that memory question, or at least maybe
Yeah,
provide
for sure.
It's kind of a tough question, but maybe provide a little guidance.
Yeah, it is. So the tricky part is like the context window limits, right? So we have like three main features for memory, which is the conversation history. That's just a linear history starting from now going backwards. That obviously isn't going to cut it, right? Because years, that's way too many messages. So we also have a feature called semantic recall, which does RAG on all the new input user messages against all the previous messages. So it'll kind of RAG, like it'll do like a vector query search on all the old messages and then put any relevant ones in the context. And then we also have a feature called working memory. So it's kind of like a state store in a way for an agent to store any relevant info over time. It just has one copy of that it can kind of upload with like, information about the user, like, any events that you talked about, things like that. So, yeah.
Yeah, good answer. Another one is, was there multi-agent configuration in this example? No, there wasn't in this example. But in the way I was originally going to architect it, I was going to actually use different agents for different capabilities. Have one be an email agent, have one be my social media manager. And it would be pretty easy to wire that up. And the nice thing about splitting it up that way is that you can write the system prompt for that specific agent. So I could be very detailed on just how I want you to manage my email, how I want you to manage, writing social media posts with maybe examples of like past posts and of what my style is. And then I would probably have one kind of supervisor agent that would use tools to interact with those other agents. So you can think of that. I would interact with the supervisor. It would call the tools. If it's a request about email, it sends it to the email agent. If it's a request about social media, it sends it to the social media agent. The challenge with that approach is it adds a little bit extra latency. It was a little more complicated, so I didn't want to use that for this example because I just wanted to show how simple it was to just add MCP servers and add all these different tools. But you could certainly wire it up that way. And if I were to build something more complex, that's probably how I would do it. But you'd have to eat a little bit of that extra latency cost because you're making multiple LLM calls and you're kind of passing messages around. But it'd be much more accurate and it'd give you a much higher level of reliability. All right, let's see. Got a few more questions. How might an app consolidate responses from multiple MCP servers? This one is it's definitely not obvious. I could think of a couple different ways to do it. If you had a couple different calendars, you'd almost want, there's a couple ways I could see doing it. One, you could be very specific in your system prompt that you need to get responses. If you're looking up at calendars, use these specific tools to get events from all calendars and combine it in this format. But now you're reliant on the LLM to do that. So another way could be if you would almost create, a meta tool, which could be maybe a workflow. And that workflow would go out and actually go out to each calendar and get events for, specific date ranges or whatever. And then you'd have a combined step in the workflow, which combines it into one, event schema and returns that back to the agent. So something like that could also work if you wanted it to be more deterministic. You're going to get better results if you would do the second approach, but it's going to take a little more work. You'd probably, if you didn't have a lot of tool calls, the agent would probably do a good enough job for like definitely demo purposes, just doing it itself, but it might break down at larger scale, at more of a scale. And yes, we can call workflow using an agent. It's a few lines of code. So actually have might actually have that. Let's see. I have that handy. Maybe not. Yeah, I don't have that. I thought I had an example of it. Yeah, so something like this is close to what you need. I'll just post it in the chat. So can you call a workflow using an agent? This is not going to be formatted well, but something like that. I posted in the chat of just, you basically need to just, hold on one second. Yeah, and we also have in the previous workshop, which is on GitHub, I think it's April 3rd, there's examples of calling workflows or agents from workflows from agents from workflows, probably both. But in this example, I create a tool and it gets a workflow and it runs a workflow. Okay, so we have a couple more minutes. Where is RAG hosted? Do you have your own instance? I guess, Abhi, you want to respond to that one?
In the sense of, we do not host RAG for anyone. We give you the tools to build your own RAG. So like RAG system. So you'll have your vector DB, you have embedding protocols, you have the workflows to sync or index data. You could build a RAG instance that, you can serve, but we have the building blocks for one. We're not one. If you want to use a RAG provider, instead, there's a really good company called Raggy.ai. They have a RAG hosted thing, which is dope. Maybe only good for people who are actually serious about RAG and are going to go with it. So if you're just playing around, just do it locally and have fun.
Yeah, so we got to give you the tools out of the box. That where I said before, we're kind of opinionated and give you good sensible defaults. So yes, we do give you like libsql built in. If you deploy it to Mastra Cloud, we kind of just it works just like it works locally. But you could also consider maybe using PG Vector, maybe using Pinecone or any other provider for your vector DB, setting up your RAG pipelines yourself. So we give you a lot of the tools, but ultimately you have the flexibility to kind of architect it the way you want. Okay. What are some tips or recommendations for hitting provider rate limits? Yeah, that's a good one. There's a couple different like tips we've heard, like key rotation. Different agents have different keys. Breaking up your agents using different keys. There's obviously ways you can increase your limits over time for some of these providers, but that usually involves paying more money or getting to a different tier or level. But it's kind of those two things. Either like you can get to different levels where they'll raise your limits, but you can also kind of use multiple keys and spread it out. So because typically the rate limits are per key for the most part. When in some providers it might actually mean you have to have different accounts.
Sad there.
Okay.
The same strategies we've been using our whole careers, if you've been doing this a while, to call third-party APIs that have limits, apply, right? You're going to be doing something in your own application to make sure you don't screw your users over based on rate limits. So I don't know. Just think of all the APIs you used to use that always rate limited you and use the same solutions.
Yeah, so I see some questions here. Yeah, can you create MCP servers out of Mastra agents soon? Not yet. Yeah, there's a whole bunch of questions. So we are basically at time, and there's a lot of questions that we didn't get to answer. So if you do drop into our Discord, we'll try to answer them. Some other questions, maybe we can do one or two more. We do have, I would look at our RAG docs. We have some pretty good RAG examples, Larry, to kind of answer your question on how to do that. How does human in the loop work? We did a workshop last week, which the code is, I think it's the April 3rd, repo that shows kind of like suspend resume in workflows. So that if you're looking for how human in the loop works, we also have examples in our example page, I believe, for how to do suspend and resume with workflows. Looks like Abby, and thanks Brad for jumping in, answering the workflows question. And we are at time, so there's a whole bunch of other questions we didn't get to. So sorry we didn't get to everything. But as I said before, if you drop into Discord, people from the team will try to answer those questions and provide you more information. Thanks everyone for attending. We will send out a recording of this probably in a couple hours. And so you'll get the recording, you'll get the links to the slides, and you'll get the link to the repo, which is already up on the Mastra-AI organization. You can find it, but I'll send it in the email as well. So thanks everybody. Have a great day.